here in the capital itself. It is disturbing. It's worrying. We don't know where this is taking place. Most importantly, we don't know how long it's going to take, and whether this is the first few stages, whether these are first few stages of what might be an invasion. Government spokesman, just reading this now.
Yes, please.
I just want to add this. Government spokesman said cruise and ballistic missile strikes are underway at control centers in the capital, Kyiv. Thank you.
So that is some new information, Charlie. And I think my next question, given what you just laid out and how residents there did not appear to be concerned, how is it that officials are going to be then communicating directives to people about what exactly they need to do now that this Russian military action is underway?
Well, this is it, Elaine. We don't know the scope or the scale of what's going on and how long it's going to continue. And most importantly, whether people's lives are at risk. One thing we were expecting is that there would be a cyber attack, communications would go down, electricity would go down. We haven't seen that. So in a manner of speaking, it suggests that there are targeted attacks. As we just read from a government spokesman, these are cruise missiles at command and control centers. Certainly that was to be expected. And the reason for that isn't necessarily that there are punitive strikes or this presages an invasion of the capital itself. But you have to keep in mind that there are command and control centers within the capital that are responsible for the Ukrainian military out in the east and other parts of the country itself. It would be a target for the Russian military to take down and cripple those parts in order to defend their own forces if there was to be an invasion. Nobody's suggesting that's happening anywhere here. And the bombardment that we've had, again, maybe 22 dozen explosions that we've heard over the past 45 minutes or so, doesn't necessarily suggest an invasion is underway, but these might be targeted attacks on what might be command and control centers. The real concern, obviously, in a city of 3 million people, is the cost of human lives.
Absolutely. All right. Charlie D'Agata in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv for us. Charlie, thank you very much. Please stay safe. Let's turn now to Holly Williams. She is in Kharkiv, Ukraine, which is in the eastern part of the country. And Holly, I know you had reported on our CBS News special report earlier, also hearing activity. What is it that you heard and witnessed?
That's right, Elaine. Also, just after 5 a.m. local time, we heard a whole series of very loud thuds, sounded like explosions. I would say more than a dozen of them. We can't confirm what they were, but certainly the suspicion our suspicion at the time was that they were missile strikes or air strikes. And a Ukrainian spokesman has just said that military targets in this region have been hit by strikes. Just before that began, we heard from Russia that Russian state TV had aired this speech by President Putin saying that he had decided to conduct a special military operation in Donbas. Donbas is that region in eastern Ukraine that's controlled by Russian-backed separatists, and then some area beyond that. He also said, though, that Russia's plans do not include an occupation of Ukraine. That sounds like he's decided, or perhaps decided, against a full-blown ground invasion of this country. However, President Putin also said that Russia will seek to demilitarize Ukraine and that clashes between the two militaries are inevitable. So we're really waiting now to see what this military involvement by Russia in Ukraine will actually look like.
And Holly, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Charlie. What was it like there leading up to this day, leading up to this evening? Because as Charlie describes it, where he is in Kyiv, residents did not appear to be very concerned. Now, you're geographically, as we should point out, I don't know if we have a map control room that we can just show. You are further to the east than Kyiv. And so I wonder what the attitude has been of people there. Have they expressed concerns? Have they been bracing for potential military action by Russia?
Yeah, Elaine, Kharkiv is only about 20 miles from the Russian border, and immediately on the other side of that border is a big part of the Russian military build-up along Ukraine's border around the city of Belgorod. One military analyst told us that he estimates there are more than 20,000 Russian troops in that area, as well as artillery and other hardware. But I should say that we only reached Kharkiv in the last few hours. We've spent the last several days in eastern Ukraine, in and around the front line in that area. And we need to point out that although there are now fears that this could be the beginning of the biggest land war that Europe has seen since the Second World War, Ukraine is already conducting a war in the east of the country against Russian-backed separatists. They've been fighting for nearly 8 years. It is bloody. Ukraine says that more than 14,000 people have been killed. We were close to the front line in villages and towns and on the front line with soldiers themselves in recent days. There has been a big escalation in violence there. We were in towns and villages that have been hit with artillery. Ukraine says that artillery came from the Russian-backed separatists. Those Russian-backed separatists are in those parts of Ukraine, breakaway parts of Ukraine, that Vladimir Putin recognized as independent republics, seen by many as a kind of precursor to this military involvement that we're now seeing now.
All right, Holly Williams in Kharkiv, Ukraine for us. Holly, thank you very much. Please stay safe. For more, let's bring in CBS News national security correspondent David Martin. He is at the Pentagon. David, what's the very latest that you're hearing from U.S. military officials, from NATO officials about what actually is taking place right now?
Well, NATO officials confirm what is now the obvious, that those explosions that Charlie and Holly have been hearing are, in fact, the beginning of the Russian attack on Ukraine, most likely launched from aircraft and by ballistic missiles targeted at command and control centers and air defense systems. And that has long been considered to be the opening phase of a Russian attack on Ukraine. And the question now is what follows. The U.S. assessment was that if they were going to conduct a full-out invasion, then this shelling by ballistic missiles, airstrikes, even artillery, would continue through the night. And then at daylight, troops, ground forces would start to move. They could either be paratroopers, they could be troops brought in by helicopter, they could be troops just rolling across the border. Now, the only piece of good news in all this is that it is not in Vladimir Putin's interest to destroy either Kyiv or Kharkiv. This is the old you break it, you own it rule. And if he goes in there and wants to have Ukraine as part of Russia, then he wants to have a functioning capital, and he wants to have a major city like Kharkiv be intact. So don't look for there to be a battle for Kyiv. You look for him to isolate Kyiv so that Kyiv cannot come to the rescue of the Ukrainian military forces off there in the east, which are faced off with Russian forces who are, according to Putin, now going to reclaim that all of that Donbas region. Fully half of the Ukraine military is down there in the east. So if the Russians can cut them off, that is a long step toward being able to divide and conquer the Ukrainian military. And of course, by taking out their command and control centers, they're taking out the ability of the military to communicate with itself and to maneuver itself out of harm's way. And it would seem that the real short-term goal for the Russians here would be to reduce an organized defense by the Ukrainians down to pockets of resistance which they could either bypass or eliminate at their leisure.
So, David, to follow up on that, you said fully half of Russia's military is there now. What about Russian weaponry assembled there in that area? And then what kind of military capabilities does Ukraine have to counter Russia's military forces?
Well, over the past couple months, ever since this invasion looked like it really was going to happen, the U.S. has been rushing defensive weapons to the Ukrainian military, and those include Javelin anti-tank missiles, and some of the U.S. allies have been giving them Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. Both of those are effective weapons, but just to get them, fly them into the capital of Kyiv, doesn't mean that they're ready to use. You have to train people on how to use those weapons, and then of course you have to deploy them at the front. And we don't really know how much progress has been made in terms of arming the Ukrainian military with some of these higher grade weapons, but they're going up against a superior force, and they can raise the price, but it is not at all likely that they can fend off the Russian military. There are estimates that the Russian military in a full-out invasion would suffer 3,000 to 10,000 casualties. That's a lot of body bags to come home to Russia. That may hurt Putin's standing in his own country. But of course, all that is just estimates and assessments now. When the sun comes up, we will see in Ukraine what the Russian military and Vladimir Putin have in store as the next step.
And David, we know that there were concerns over Russia launching cyber attacks against Ukraine as well. Are you hearing anything about that at this point from military officials?
Well, we saw some cyber attacks today, but there was not an indication that they were destructive. They were more malicious. In other words, they bombarded websites, and the websites were forced off the internet for a while. But as of right now, anyway, I have no confirmation that truly destructive cyber attacks were conducted. And that may be in keeping with what I was talking about earlier, which is you break it, you own it. You don't want to destroy Ukraine's digital communication system if you're going to, or if you're planning to, take it over.
Right, and as we saw in Charlie D'Agata's report there from Kyiv, as he looked around, the lights were on, the power was on. And so we'll obviously continue to watch very closely. David Martin, CBS News national security correspondent. Thank you very much, David, for your reporting. Let's turn now to our Nancy Cordes, CBS News chief White House correspondent, joining us by phone tonight. Nancy, what can you tell us? President Biden, we know, issued a statement not long after Russian President Vladimir Putin gave that televised a set of remarks in which he announced the special military operation, as he called it, in eastern Ukraine. What was President Biden's reaction?
His reaction, Elaine, was that Russia is going to suffer the consequences of what it is doing right now. He called this an unprovoked and unjustified attack. And he said Russia alone is responsible for the death and destruction this attack will bring. The president said he's going to be announcing more consequences tomorrow in a speech to the American people. We expect that will happen early afternoon. And we're now seeing basically on a daily basis new sanctions being levied against Russian banks, Russian individuals, Russian oligarchs. And so we'll wait to see what the president unveils tomorrow. But we know that he has been holding off on announcing basically the motherlode of sanctions, the swift and severe sanctions that he and other top administration officials have been describing that would really, in a devastating fashion, cut off Russian banks from the West entirely. And so we'll wait to see if that is what President Biden is now ready to announce after we see what's happening in Ukraine tonight.
Yeah, on that point, Nancy, remind us, he had faced bipartisan criticism, as I understand it, for not going ahead sooner with those kinds of sanctions that you're describing and not going after Russia in a more aggressive way. What was the argument, essentially, from the Biden administration about why they did not get to that level? It's essentially they were holding back so as they could escalate as military action escalated?
Right, because they said if they levied all the sanctions now, then they would basically be taking all the arrows out of their quiver, that they would have no additional ways to deter Russia from acting. They felt that by holding these sanctions over Russia's head, they had at least a chance of dissuading Vladimir Putin, of warning him how devastating these sanctions would be, but not imposing most of them unless he did what he's obviously doing right now. You had Republicans and Democrats, however, who argued, look, we know what he's going to do. He has signposted what he's going to do. We have satellite imagery of tens of thousands of Russian troops arrayed at the border. We have lots of intelligence indicating that he's about to attack. We should just go ahead and do it now. At the end of the day, it looks like the White House is going to end up doing this a day or two after some of these Democrats and Republicans wanted them to. It's just a difference of opinion when it comes to foreign policy. And I should point out, Elaine, something really interesting that's been going on in the backdrop here. Even as the shelling began, there was an emergency UN meeting that was taking place and is still taking place in New York. And we've just been watching diplomat after diplomat from around the world almost begging Putin to change course. And it really exemplifies how isolated Putin is right now. Even his closest allies, the Chinese, said, they want all sides to stand down. And so it's an indication of how arrayed not just the West, but most of the world is against what Putin is doing. And President Biden, in addition to his speech to the nation tomorrow, he's also going to be holding an emergency meeting a virtual meeting with G7 leaders as they continue to try to figure out what they could possibly do to try to force Putin off the trajectory he's on right now.
All right, Nancy Cordes, CBS News Chief White House Correspondent. Nancy, thank you very much. For more, let's bring in Mary Ilyushina, CBS News foreign correspondent from Moscow. Mary, what can you tell us? We know that, as Nancy pointed out, there was... Okay, I'm told we don't have that guest right now. So we are going to go ahead and turn to CBS News Chief Foreign Correspondent. Chief. All right, we're going to take you to the BBC now.
Shows the disdain that Russia has for international law and for the United Nations. Russia must be accountable to the Security Council. For this reason, France...
So that's the France representative there, live at the special emergency UN, special UN security meeting at the request of Ukraine that's happening in New York. And just a reminder that President Vladimir Putin has come out tonight on Russian TV and effectively declared war on Ukraine, although he calls it a special military operation in Donbas. We'll have more news on this breaking story. Do stay tuned right here to BBC News.
No matter what the circumstances, we call for the protection and...
This is BBC News. I'm Simon Pusey. Our top stories. Reports of explosions in the Ukrainian capital as Vladimir Putin announces a special military operation in Ukraine. The United Nations Security Council holds an emergency meeting on Ukraine with the Secretary General making a direct plea to the Russian leader.
President Putin